Good morning. A couple of announcements before we begin. This morning, we're delighted to welcome Reverend Mary Margaret Earl, Executive Director and Senior Minister of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministries in Roxbury. She will lead us in worship this morning. Our connection to the Urban Ministries has been a long commitment to the work of the Renewal House, which is one of the many programs offered by the Urban Ministry. The newbie class today will be still going on. Lunch will be provided, and it will be starting at 11:45 and going till 2:45. There are a few spots left if you're interested in signing up. For coffee hour, we're asking that you don't cut through the Beal House as you enter the building. Take a breath, sit back and relax, and let us begin to enter into this sacred hour. Whatever faith you have known or flags of your heritage, you are welcome here. Whoever you are and whomever you love, you are welcome here. We are so pleased you are here with us this morning to join us in Sunday worship. I am Jacquie Hochstin, a member of this parish, and will be your worship associate this morning. Thank you for being here this morning as we speak truth, seek comfort, and join hands and hearts for the journey forward. As we begin our worship, let us light our chalice to the words of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. From the bottom of my very existence, I am pervaded with light energy, shining colors to my eye, warmth to my skin, inspiration to my soul. In this unity of creative sparks and sparkling creation, life unfolds. Let us open our senses to the light within us and around us and send it out with shining examples. O Holy One, who is known by many names and who some of us call God, we are here this morning present with each other, navigating our way through a challenging world that at times makes us feel anxious, fearful, divided, hopeless, and isolated, yet longing for love and peace. We have brought into this space joys and concerns that have been named and called out, but some which remain silently in our hearts, of which are no less real. We are here in community with one another and in your presence. Hear us and be with us, all here in the spiritual home that is built with love and compassion, reminding us that it is in places such as this one where we celebrate our shared humanity. We pray this morning for peace in the world and for the people of Ukraine. Give them courage and strength in this fearful and devastating time for them. May all find the seeds of compassion and love that reside in all of us to move us forward with dignity and grace as is meant to be. Blessed be and amen. I ask that we all take some time in silence. Please join in the responsorial reading number 568 in the gray hymnal. You will read the italicized and I will read the other. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. More than half a tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving. Live as if you like yourself, and it may happen. This is how we're going to live for a long time, not always. When we give, we say yes to something we value. In this congregation, we take up an offering each week to say yes to the values of our UU faith and yes to this beloved community. Together, we use these gifts to serve with ever greater love. Please give as you are able. Today's offering will be gratefully received. Our offering anthem is Come Sing a Song With Me, performed by Mike Nee and the First Parish Bell Choir.
Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you home when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you home when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know you're mine. And I'll bring you home when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time.
Lovely and appropriate music this morning. Good morning. It is lovely to be here with you in 3 dimensions on a sunny day. I want to thank Reverend Emily for arranging for me to be here with you this morning, and my worship associate Jacquie Hochstin for her support for this morning's worship and for being a great champion of the work of the Urban Ministry. As you likely know, First Parish has been a great champion of the work of Renewal House in particular, one of the programs of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry. Our Renewal House shelter is a long-standing shelter that serves survivors of domestic violence. And for years, you've, led by Marianne Barrows, been, led wonderful visits to the lake with bountiful food and come to our campus to usher in the holiday season with a wonderful Christmas event with crafts and food and fellowship. It's good to be with you, remembering those good times that have been interrupted by COVID, but we hope we'll one day be able to resume in person again. And it's good to be able to update you this morning on Renewal House. For about a year, residents were moved off-site in separate hotel quarters to keep folks healthy, and they've moved back, and we're finding our rhythm again, resuming with groups, support groups and laughter and fellowship. So it's nice to be able to share that word with you. And it's good to be here also to share more broadly some of the work of the Urban Ministry that you may not be as familiar with as a member congregation. And so I want to begin this morning telling you more about the work of Renewal House, and I want to, or rather the whole Urban Ministry, and I want to begin with a story, and it's a hard story. So it is a story of the exact moment that I knew that I had been shaped by racism. I was 18 years old, playing soccer in gym class, my first semester in college, and I tore down the soccer field with drive and purpose, and I kicked the ball hard toward the goal, but right into the shins of an opposing player. And my fierceness turned in a flash into fear. Not because I had hit the shins of a fellow player, that was common, but because my opponent, also a college student, was Black, and I feared her reaction. I skidded to a stop, apologized profusely, my fierceness evaporating into thin air, and she, who I did not know, she, the most soft-spoken of young women, said, "Oh, it's fine, don't worry, it's fine." And it was that split second of fear colliding with gentleness, the upending of my reaction by her soft kindness that jogged loose what I had not seen in myself and was forced to see. My reaction was racist. I feared her and her response to my drive into her shins because she was Black. I'd been shaped by racism, and I didn't know how that had happened. I grew up in an overwhelmingly white farming community in upstate New York. My sports teams were all white, my 4-H club white, my friends, my neighbors. I didn't see Black people, and I thought racism had been settled in the 1960s. So how had it happened? This fear. The gift of that confusing moment was that I glimpsed that I had absorbed racism without knowing it. We are shaped by stories and untruths that are rendered invisible and by a history that's been covered over. Our biases form through a million images in the movies and TV, like the gradual building up of a drip sandcastle, one small handful of sand at a time. These shape our inner landscape. Our outer landscape has been shaped by racism too, by policies paired with bias, courts and schools, where we live and who does not live there. Despite all of it, for white people, it is easy not to see it and ignore it. And so the question is, what is asked of us then as people of faith? How do we bring into focus something that is so easily blurred? In 2021, the UU Urban Ministry embraced a new mission statement, which calls us to work across race and place to dismantle racism and white supremacy culture and to advance racial, social, and economic justice. It's a call that inspires, but it's also daunting. How do we do that? So for those of you who are less familiar to us, the Urban Ministry is a 190-year-old organization now based in Roxbury, the historic heart of the African-American community in Boston. We are grounded in our UU faith values and encircled by UU member congregations like First Parish. We've done many things through our history. Today, we provide programs to trauma survivors like Renewal House and also a workforce program for survivors. We have after-school programming for Boston high school students, and we engage the Roxbury community through the arts and humanities. We embark now on a mission that will call us to do more to directly confront the racism that means that the average Roxbury resident lives 30 years less than a resident of Whiteback Bay just 1 mile away. That means that Black college students leave before graduation at much higher rates than white counterparts. The legacy that means that the household wealth of white Bostonians exponentially outstrips that of Black Bostonians. Our new mission statement will call for new strategies and programs to confront this legacy. And it will take a deeper commitment by our member congregations. So I'm here asking for your help to live into that mission. Because it will take all of us, and also all of us, our heads, our hands, and our hearts to do this work. Our heads help us to learn about the history of race in the United States. The African-American author James Baldwin said this: "History, as nearly no one seems to know, is not merely something to be read, and it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. We are called to learn that history." The African-American attorney and activist Bryan Stevenson, graduate of Harvard, tells the story of sitting in a courtroom as a defense attorney. He writes this: "The judge and the prosecutor entered through a door in the back of the courtroom, laughing and chatting. When the judge saw me sitting at the defense table, he said to me harshly, 'Hey, you shouldn't be in here without counsel. Go back outside and wait in the hallway until your lawyer arrives.' I stood up and smiled broadly, and I said, 'Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor, we haven't met. My name is Bryan Stevenson. I'm the lawyer on the case set for hearing this morning.' The judge laughed at his mistake, and the prosecutor joined in. I forced myself to laugh because I didn't want my young client, a white child who'd been prosecuted as an adult, to be disadvantaged. But I was disheartened by the experience," he wrote. "Of course, innocent mistakes occur, but constantly being underestimated, suspected, accused, watched, doubted, distrusted, presumed guilty, and even feared is a burden borne by people of color that can't be understood or confronted without a deeper conversation about our history of racial injustice," he wrote. The prison system, the wealth gap, the health gap, The reaction that I had to my classmate on the soccer field can be understood only by examining our history, by becoming conscious of the legacy that we've inherited that began with the arrival of the first kidnapped Africans on these shores, by reading articles like the New York Times 1619 Project or books like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. We need our heads for this work. But anyone that gets frustrated by endless book clubs exploring white fragility knows that we also need to move on and work for change. We need action. And there are abundant ways. At the Urban Ministry, we address the racial wealth gap by highlighting Black-owned businesses in Roxbury. We make commercials about them and we post them on our community conversations webinars and encourage UU congregations to support them. We launched a Roxbury Artist Amplification Project showcasing artists of color through virtual galleries and created a catalog of their work, encouraging UUs to purchase from it. We connect UUs from member congregations with partner organizations fighting for racial justice, those resisting displacement caused by gentrification, working for environmental justice in communities of color, and for educational equity. We need our hands, we need action. But even that isn't enough. We also need for our hearts to be in this. We need relationships across difference because relationships are the catalyst for real change. An awakened heart stays the course. Nearly 2 years ago, police killed an unarmed African-American man named George Floyd. It was a death that reignited the Black Lives Matter movement across the world. UU congregations like this one gathered in the midst of the most severe part of the COVID shutdown to march and demand change. The flames of that movement continue to burn for justice, but we need to ensure that they do not dim. And it is relationships, our hearts, that ensure that. Love makes us steadfast. Love holds us accountable. Love gives us the courage to do hard things. The African-American minister and historian, the Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed, in one of his sermons tells how the white clergy came to join Martin Luther King in Selma 50 years ago. Among them were Unitarian Universalists like the Reverend James Reeb, Orloff Miller, Clark Olson, and Jack Kent. These individuals, Morrison Reed writes, came to Selma not because of what they knew about segregation. It was because of the relationships they had. Reverend James Reeb, who was killed by white supremacists during his visit, lived in Dorchester, where his children attended Black public schools and where he was immersed in the grassroots empowerment of his African-American neighbors. He knew Black people. Morrison Reed writes, "Today we assume that the outpouring of support and the rush to Selma was because of the righteousness of the cause and the magnitude of the injustice, but that doesn't fully explain the response. Of course, it was because of the cause, but it was relationships that compelled them to go, the connection of one person to another." And here is our problem. Few places make it harder to make a connection across race than Greater Boston. According to the Boston Magazine article, "How Has Boston Gotten Away with Being So Segregated for So Long?" Of 51 metro areas with significant African-American populations were the 15th most segregated. 2/3 of Boston's Black population lives in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, and hardly any Black people live in the suburbs, and that is by design. The article spells out in excruciating detail all the systems that for the past 100 years have ensured home ownership and therefore wealth creation was kept out of the hands of Black people, and how these systems create a chasm between white people and Black people and prevented us from knowing one another even into 2022. Segregation may not be the law of the land around Greater Boston, but look around and we know it's a fact of Greater Boston. Over the past century, covenant restrictions and subdivisions and redlining and racist FHA policies and racist HUD policies kept Black people out of certain Boston neighborhoods and absolutely out of the suburbs. Here's some examples from the article. In the early 1900s, the first subdivision in Brookline included a racially restrictive covenant, which meant basically that homes couldn't be sold to Black people. Eventually, the National Association of Real Estate Boards, whose code of ethics discouraged members from introducing Black people into white neighborhoods, drafted model covenants like Brookline's and encouraged homeowners associations to adopt them. The FHA was formed in the 1930s, and between 1934 and 1962 spent $120 billion on home loans, 98% of which went to white families. These loans were the driver of the exodus from Boston to the suburbs for white people. Quote, because the FHA believed that property values would diminish if Black people moved into neighborhoods, its underwriting manual provided a guideline stating that properties shall continue to be occupied by the same racial and social classes. The agency routinely declined to insure developments that weren't exclusively white, end quote. By 1970, Boston suburbs, except Cambridge, were 98% white. Meanwhile, as white families moved to the suburbs, Black families migrated from the South to Boston and found that the only places that they could live were places like Roxbury, a neighborhood where the banks would not make home improvement loans, where the housing was older, and which became ripe picking for slumlords. As a Brown University researcher said, quote, the concept of a Black neighborhood as a bad neighborhood comes right out of that process, end quote. And so we have the story of the bad, scary neighborhood of Roxbury. Brian Stevenson says that to make real change, people, privileged people, need to get proximate to those who are not privileged. Quote, to make a difference in creating a healthier community, a healthier society, a healthier nation, we've got to find a way to get proximate to the poor and the vulnerable. He said, I absolutely believe that when we isolate ourselves, when we allow ourselves to be shielded and disconnected from those who are vulnerable and disfavored, when we sustain that, we sustain and contribute to these problems. I am persuaded, he said, that in proximity, there is something we can learn about how we change the world. The fact of our segregation makes that hard to do. And when we are not proximate, when we do not personally feel connected to those being disproportionately arrested, incarcerated, killed in police incidents, when we are not connected to the neighborhoods suffering environmental pollution or displacement by gentrification, let's be honest, it is easier to set it all aside, to put this movement ignited by the death of George Floyd back on the shelf, to reduce it to a fading bumper sticker or a tattered lawn sign. As a woman who's white, I am not immune. So here is what helps keep me going. I told you the story of my soccer field revelation, and now I want to share another story about the gift of proximity. Before I became a minister, I was a newspaper reporter in upstate New York. And my cubicle neighbor in the features department was an African-American woman whose newsroom friends included 2 other African-American women. These colleagues gathered daily at the desk of my neighbor, chatting, joking, sharing stories that I got to hear and become part of. And the dailiness built among us some knowing and some trust. I was then newly vegan, and I was a new animal rights activist. And I was assigned a feature story that would mean posting and sharing a recipe that included veal. And after agonizing about it, I said, no, my conscience wouldn't let me. My editors insisted, threatening to fire me, and my fate hung in the balance. As I recall it, 25 years later, 3 people rallied around me, none of them vegan. They were these 3 African-American women, all young, without power in the newsroom hierarchy, but they offered to start a petition to defend me. They were willing to put themselves at risk to defend my right of conscience. In a sea of colleagues, most everyone else stepped back. The ones who stepped forward were these 3 women. They had no interest in animal rights, but they had every interest in standing up for the underdog. And unlike many of my white colleagues, apparently, they didn't assume that those in power were right. I learned a lot from that time, and my friendship with these women endured long after I left journalism for ministry. I never forgot the gift of proximity of my seating arrangement. It's a gift that I continue to receive at the Urban Ministry. Most of our staff are people of color from the communities we serve. So are our program participants and our neighbors. I am gifted daily by proximity. At the Urban Ministry, we think a lot about how to build proximity between member congregations and our neighborhood, not proximity by charity, but how we create space for relationships that are built on listening, learning, trust, respect. These are built over time and with intention. We are seeking not to come in and help Roxbury. We seek to learn from Roxbury and to build bridges between suburb and city so that we can work together to make change. There's a quotation on the wall at the Urban Ministry that you see when you walk in from the Aboriginal activist Lila Watson, and it says this: "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." That's what guides us. We organize tours to Black businesses and historic tours of our neighborhood. We gather committees and task forces made up of UU and our neighbors to shape our work. This past autumn, I spent a chilly morning in Roxbury at an event honoring the elders of our neighborhood who protected and defended the community against racist neglect through the years. The Urban Ministry had joined a coalition honoring them with a photograph to become a portrait. I felt deep gratitude for the opportunity that I've had to come to know some of these elders, to listen to them, to build relationships. These relationships set my heart on justice for the long haul. Every day we seek ways to introduce, to knit together, to overcome the ways the world has divided us so that we can forge relationships that will help us make the lasting change that we seek. There's no magic wand for relationship building. It's just time, intention, trying again and trying again. I think it's work that you know through your Renewal House relationships. It's that faithfulness, the showing up, listening, learning, listening more. And so my invitation is this: to continue the work that you've done and to build on it in building your relationship with the urban ministry. Join our mailing list if you're not on it. Reach out for a conversation with our engagement team. Talk to Jacquie about how to become part of building something and how to deepen your involvement. Reach out to imagine the gifts that you bring to the work of keeping the fires for racial justice burning and burning brightly. And may it be so, and amen. And I invite you to join with me in our closing hymn, number 131, Love Will Guide Us.